Everyone in town knew the story of Shadow Bridge. It was one of those old urban legends that teenagers told each other to get spooked, especially on summer nights when darkness fell early. According to the legend, if you crossed the bridge alone at midnight, you'd see a figure following in your shadow. The bridge itself was an old stone bridge on the outskirts of town, stretching over a dark river. It had been abandoned for years, overgrown with weeds and ivy. No one ever went there anymore, or at least no one admitted to it. Jake and his friends didn't believe the legend, though. It was just a story, something to scare kids. So, when their friend Lucas dared them to cross the bridge at midnight, Jake shrugged. Why not? He thought. What's the worst that could happen? The night was cooler than expected as Jake made his way to the bridge with Lucas and Emma. It was almost midnight and the town was quiet, the streets deserted. You really think we'll see something? Emma asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and fear. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. Nah, it's just a story. We'll cross the bridge, laugh about it, and go home. They reached the bridge just as the clock on Jake's phone hit 11:58. The old stone structure loomed ahead of them, half hidden in the shadows. Lucas grinned, pushing Jake forward. You first, man. Show us it's just a myth. Jake rolled his eyes but stepped forward. He walked to the center of the bridge and looked down at the dark water below. His shadow stretched out in front of him, long and distorted in the moonlight. He waited for something, anything, but there was only silence. Jake turned back to his friends, ready to laugh it off, when a chill ran down his spine. Emma was staring at him, her face pale, and Lucas had taken a step back, his eyes wide. What? Jake asked, suddenly uneasy. Your shadow, Emma whispered. Jake froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, he looked down at the ground again. His shadow was still there, stretching out in front of him. But now it wasn't alone. Behind his shadow, just at the edges of the moonlight, was another shape. Dark, thin, and tall, it stood just behind him, like a second shadow. But this one wasn't his. Jake swallowed hard, fear gripping his chest. It's just a trick of the light, he muttered, trying to convince himself as much as his friends. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting. Jake, get off the bridge! Lucas shouted, his voice shaking. Jake didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran, his feet pounding against the stone as the shadow behind him seemed to move closer, stretching out like it was trying to catch him. Emma and Lucas were already halfway across the bridge, calling for him to hurry. But no matter how fast Jake ran, the shadow stayed with him, closing the gap inch by inch. He reached the end of the bridge, his lungs burning, but when he looked back, the shadow had disappeared. There was nothing behind him now, just the bridge and the quiet night. He gasped for breath, leaning against a tree, but something felt wrong. His heart was still racing, and the air around him was too cold, too still. Did you see that? Lucas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jake nodded, his mouth dry. It's gone, right? It's not following us anymore? Emma glanced back at the bridge, her face pale. I don't know, but I don't think it's over. They hurried back to town, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Jake tried to shake off the feeling, tried to tell himself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a hallucination. But when he got home, things got worse. That night, as he lay in bed, Jake couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt like something was watching him. He turned on the light, but his room was empty. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. And then, as he glanced at the floor, he saw it. His shadow, stretched out beside him. But there was another one, right next to it, the same tall, thin shape from the bridge. It had followed him home. It's been weeks since that night, and things haven't gotten better. In fact, they've gotten worse. At first, it was just the shadow. I would see it out of the corner of my eye standing next to mine, always in the background, always close. But then the nightmares started. Every night, I'd dream I was back on the bridge, running, always running, with that shadow chasing me, reaching for me. And every time I'd wake up just before it caught me. I told Lucas and Emma, but they didn't believe me. They hadn't seen the shadow since that night, and they tried to convince me it was all in my head. But I knew the truth. It was real. The worst part is, the shadow is getting stronger. At first, it would only appear at night, but now I see it during the day, following me everywhere. I can feel it watching me, waiting. I tried to avoid the bridge, but it didn't matter. The shadow doesn't need the bridge anymore. It's with me, wherever I go. Even when I'm not looking, I can feel it. It's in every reflection, every dark corner. And it's getting closer. I don't know how much longer I can keep running.